we give a talk about corporate digital responsibility and the policies in the organizations and company they are working in and for. Here, just for information, but I think I already shared this information with you, we had a lesson specific, 1 hour on corporate digital responsibility a month ago for the students here. And so I covered, in essence, the framing of the EU policies and how CDR has started. I mentioned the manifesto, Rob, but I didn't go into details because, of course, that will be one of the topics of today's conversation. People in the room know that if they want, they can raise their hands and interrupt you. If you want to speak, however, please, you can close to the microphone. Otherwise, our colleagues cannot hear you. Alvise, if you want to say something, otherwise we just...
No, I guess I thank our guests in the name of the department and the Polytechnico of Turin, and we are very happy to have you here, not with us, but somehow with us, and just that. So thank you very much, and I guess we will have a question later. Maybe we will have a chance to discuss a bit later.
And very good. We have, I think, your permission for recording this because this will be distributed through the communication channels of the department. Up to you. I suppose that Rob would start, but as much as you need, the way you need, it's fine for us. Rob, would you like to introduce your activities and how we established a counter now 3 years ago?
Absolutely. And I was going to share some slides. I can share some slides for those that are interested in the detail later. But what I'll do is talk through my background in terms of corporate digital responsibility and what I've seen develop in a number of countries, regions of the world over the last 3 years, especially. Can everyone hear me okay? Just to check on sound. Excellent. Okay. So what I'll do to start with is give a bit of background in terms of how we got to the CDR manifesto and describe the CDR manifesto in some detail. And then I've got 5 or 6 case studies that just illustrate some of the work that I've seen happen primarily across Europe, but I'll mention a couple of non-European examples as well, and bring that to life. If there are questions, then please make sure that I do stop, and happy to kind of go into that at the time. So firstly, I guess in terms of starting, my background is as a technologist. 30 plus years working in largely European organizations, primarily Atos, which was French, well, it's primarily French. And I used to work with a guy called Thierry Breton, who was chief executive of Atos at the time and is now EU commissioner, introducing things like the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act. Now, around 2016, I remember standing in Paris in front of Thierry's scientific community, which was a community of about 100 people from across the globe, all of whom had a passion for innovation and technology. And my argument at the time was we focused too much on digital transformation in the context of a business and not enough time thinking about the impact on the broader society or the planet itself. So how do we think more about an organization or a societal impact of digital technologies was the question I asked on the back of things like Brexit in the UK, Trump in the US, Cambridge Analytica, big tech, etc. I also looked at inspiration from some fiction, so Ready Player One, The Circle, Black Mirror, were near future dystopian fiction based on technology, which were helping to inform some of the things that could or could not happen. I led a work stream for 2 years looking at what we term digital society. But But actually, around end of 2017, beginning of 2018, we first used the term corporate digital responsibility. We thought that kind of nobody else was using that term. We did look around Google. Though I know that there were some previous academic examples, so I'm not claiming to have invented the term, but we were one of the first use cases talking around the term corporate digital responsibility, which we were looking at things like privacy, accessibility, inclusion, ease of access, etc. There have been a number of other key definitions that have emerged over the years subsequently. So I might look to Michael Wade's definition in the MIT Sloan Review, published in 2020. Michael at IMD, author of a number of digital and innovation books, proposed the quadrant definition of CDR. In Germany, there's been lots of work, BVDW, doing the CDR building blocks, again, towards the end of 2020. Dr. Saskia Dorr, with the world's, as far as I know, first book on CDR, originally published in the first quarter of 2020, and then translated into English and published kind of later in the year. There've also been Ethos in Switzerland published their CDR principles, again around 2020, and breaking down what CDR meant to an organization that was looking at long-term sustainability of big Swiss organizations in the context of advice around pension fund investments. So around the start of 2021, a number of us around the world, and certainly including Michael and Saskia, Oliver Merck, who runs the CDR LinkedIn group and was involved in the work in Germany, Tim Frick in the US, behind the Sustainable Web Manifesto, myself, Christopher, who was also kind of working with me, Ethos, got together and aggregated those definitions, really picking out the best. I think it was probably fair to say 80% of each definition was similar, but there were just some differences. The Atos one really didn't touch sustainability in the environment. Saskia's work was more around sustainability in the environment. Ethos was coming at it from an investment and funds point of view. So we spent 6 months bringing together a framework that looked at those and developed what we then launched in October 21 as the CDR, International CDR Manifesto. Now, the purpose behind doing that was to just try and help other countries around the world, other organizations around the world, to hook into established research and work that had been done before. One of the things that I found typically happening around the early days of CDR was that a lot of that thinking was within country. So it was about to try and connect more people, because for me, CDR and digital responsibility or digital ethics or environment, that's about the world responding. Many of those challenges are global challenges. So how do we help the world understand, hook into research that had been done and make it real? The most important thing, making it real. How do we get organizations or governments to respond and to implement some of the things that we were talking about? So the manifesto was born 2021. It's hosted on corporatedigitalresponsibility.net, the website. We did an update in October 2022, which was just a minor refinement based on some experience of working with it for a year. We've translated it to date into 15 different languages, including Italian, thanks to some people who are obviously kind of in the room. That's been a key part of it for me, is that point around how can we talk about a fair and equitable society, inclusion and accessibility for all, if it was only ever published in English. So being able to bring that to life for people all over the world. And just to illustrate some of that, this year alone, we've launched the Arabic version, the Japanese version. I had an email last week from Slovenia, from somebody saying they'd noticed it wasn't in Slovenian and how could they help. In 2 weeks' time, I travelled to Norway, where a Norwegian IT association is launching the Norwegian version. So I'll talk about some of those things later. But that was the background and birth of the manifesto. Now, if I can talk about the logic that we applied in that. So we were trying to find a framework, Michael's framework with the quadrant, that there was quite a lot of debate around the fourth quadrant of technology. Because technology, if we're looking at digital responsibility, what an organisation should do around its use of digital technologies, we almost felt it was embedded, the technology quadrant was almost embedded in all of the others. So it didn't quite sit right. And I should say Michael was involved in these conversations too.
If you might please explain this technology quadrant here.
Yeah, so Michael's definition that he had, which, as I say, it was published in the MIT Sloan Review, and he had a quadrant of 4 areas that they looked at. And those were social, economic, technological, and environmental aspects of CDR. And the diagram that he used is on the webpage in the manifesto. So if you look at the entry in Italian or English, it's repeated there. But the technology, the separation of the technology piece didn't quite work well. So what we ended up working with was a framework that was based on the traditional CSR intersecting 3 circles. So social, economic, and environmental, but to look at them all through a digital lens. So there wasn't 4, but there were 3 circles that intersected, and then we applied the best of all of the definitions that we could find into those 7 areas. Because if you look at the intersections, obviously you've got economic intersecting with environmental, you've got social intersecting with environmental, etc. So that was the outline of the framework, which gave us the 7 principles, and each of the 7 principles was then expanded. So I'm going to go through the 7 principles one by one, and just not necessarily kind of spend too much time on each, but to give a flavour. Feel free to ask questions or look at them in greater detail on the website, if that's okay. So the first one, which was the...
Let me just make one check. Riuscite a capire? Ok, perché sennò venite più vicini. Ok, grazie.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first one was purpose and trust. Now, this was at the heart of all of 3 intersecting circles. And it was to say, if digital is at the heart of corporate responsibility, then it has to be clear that how we protect the reputation and trust in the context of the organisation and the employees, customers, shareholders, all parties. It took a big input from the ethos definition, which started off with clarity around corporate purpose and a publication of a digital responsibility code, what commitments you were making towards the use of data or algorithms or technology within the business. It focuses strongly around governance, digital governance, so responsible digital governance, most often talked about in the context of a digital ethics board or a digital ethics advisory panel or Guardian Council or CDR Council or various iterations we've seen in different countries. And it recognised the need not only to be aware of regulation, but to find appropriate and extended regulation to help protect some of the things that were seen as potential harms. Now, what I find about when we talk about this and work with organisations is the digital ethics framework and the digital ethics board is possibly the highest priority of focus. And I know from previous conversations with Sean, I know that's absolutely a kind of core area of the work that he and Merck have been doing. So I will let Jean talk about that shortly. That's the first principle. The second principle was focusing around societal impact. So it's that intersection of societal with economic and looking to say how do we ensure fairness and equitable access for all parties, all sections of community, all sections of society? So it includes things like accessibility and inclusion, but very much focused around thinking about it in the product and service development cycle. A lot of organisations have, for example, diversity and inclusion initiatives. But the key aspect here was to ensure that it was embedded in the creation of the products and services that the organisation provided to best ensure that it was going to meet the needs of all of those aspects of society that it was trying to deliver value for, rather than just in terms of being seen as the right thing to do within the business. It was about focusing on things like responsible employment rights, because we've seen through the supply chain, digital supply chain, things like the gig economy and more, how do we focus on fair ways of working that impacted those elements of society that maybe needed kind of a bit more of that support. So that was very much looking at how do you ensure that the way in which it impacts people, all elements of society, no matter who they are, is considered. Now, some of this is law. I mean, people will have to deliver in certain countries products that meet accessibility law and regulation. But it's really to kind of push it further forward to say, what else can organisations do to have a more proactive impact? The third one, very much focused around the societal element, was societal well-being. So it's think about things like privacy, responsible data practices. You mentioned GDPR earlier, but also extending out into cybersecurity and minimising harmful impacts in terms of use of tools. We talk about things in that sense like business models that are dependent on addictive behaviours. Can we get more screen time to maximise advertising revenues? But that's not healthy in terms of from a consumer point of view. We talk about things like digital maturity skills and things like digital poverty. I talked, even in the UK, I talked to an organisation, which is a charity focusing on digital poverty, trying to get laptops in children's hands to enable them to engage effectively at school. 14 million laptops lying around in people's homes unused, 1 million kids in the UK without a laptop. It's how do you give people the inspiration, ability to engage in a digital world and improve their digital skills. And then thinking about digital well-being as well, both physical, there are plenty of products that focus on our physical health and otherwise. Principle 4, considering the economic and societal impact. And this was beginning to think about commercial models around digital. So in part, it was saying, think about responsible and sustainable automation. So every business cannot automate everything, and therefore the entirety of society was sat around doing nothing. It was to think about how further development of skills, capabilities enabled and empowered people to have the ability to do their job in a more effective way. It was thinking about the use of third-party data and the use of third-party algorithms to ensure things like transparency, bias, etc. And it was to think about different commercial models. Do you give yourself the right to commercialize your data rather than just giving that data for free for other people to commercialize as an example? Or do you support right to repair to make it easier to kind of support and extend the life of equipment such that it's cheaper and more effective from an environment point of view?
Next week, in a couple of weeks, we will have an event here with the organization whose name is Restarters. Restarters actually started in the UK 10 years ago, and they are in essence teaching people how to practice the right to repair. And we will do this with a very nice team from this university, which is already engaged in repairing and giving to students of high school PCs and other devices in order to fight what you call digital poverty. Okay, so it's quite interesting because This Restarters organization started, as I said, in the UK, and now they are starting activities here in Italy as well. And it's tangible, and so people are grabbing it with enthusiasm.
Excellent. And that's
about that. If I wanted just to share with you, last week we had a conversation about the ethics of algorithm, and we have seen what happens when you are asking Chat GPT to create a software to include or to manage men and women, white and black. It's quite astonishing what comes out of it.
And we've had similarly, I know there's a guy called Jonathan Armstrong who's a lawyer around GDPR and AI, and he came to speak to us about some appalling examples of unintended use of, or actually intended use of, AI to deliver things that weren't about fair and equitable society. So the key thing I was going to say was the point around the manifesto was it was to kind of give visibility and awareness around the breadth of all things that might be relevant. It's not to say that an organisation should implement all of these in equal share. It's to get people thinking and organisations thinking about the consequential impact of some of the things that they could do differently or could drive value from their organisation in looking at. So the last three principles are all involved with the environment. So the first one, in terms of linkage with the economic segment again, was looking at things like the supply chain. So it was thinking about how do organisations hook into ecosystems, clean tech, eco-tech ecosystems, look at things like the impact investments, impact economy. Where do you kind of understand how that innovation that is happening can help you? We had a really, really long debate around whether we should mention offset or not at all in the manifesto. And we ended up settling on there had to be some times when it was a mechanism, but it should be done so in a very verifiable, certified way, because as we've seen in recent press, there's lots of confusion about the true value of that. But it's also looking at changing consumer behaviours. What can an organisation do to evolve and accelerate the change of consumer demand and consumer behaviours for more ethical, more environmental products or services in the supply chain? Principle 6 was around innovation. So some people might be familiar with the UNEP work around CODES, Coalition of Digital Environmental Sustainability. One of the key 3 shifts for them is innovating to solve things like climate change, etc. And this is what this one was about. It was, how do you think about the broader impact beyond your organisation? What products or services could you deliver that have a larger impact than whether it was offsetting or addressing your carbon emissions or your waste or things like that? So how do you innovate to solve those things? Whereas Principle 7 was looking at the reducing the impact, decarbonisation impact of the tech that you use. So for example, if you have lots of data centres or you use blockchain or crypto kind of significantly, or those things that we know are big on energy use, how can you do things like consciously or mitigate those? And it hooks into things like European initiatives like the SDIA, Sustainable Digital Infrastructures Alliance, or the Sustainable Web Manifesto I mentioned earlier. So that's per click carbon. If you look at things like website carbon or EcoGrader, it measures your website in terms of its energy efficiency. So that's a run through the 7 principles of the manifesto. And I mentioned the languages, so now available in English, Italian, French, German, Spanish, Portuguese, Greek, Turkish, Swedish, Norwegian, Finnish, Lithuanian, Arabic, Japanese, Romanian, and a bunch more that we're kind of hoping to launch in the coming months. It's on the website. Anyone can have a look at that. The assets are all open source, so people can adopt and utilize them how they wish. We have the idea of supporters. It's not a financial thing. It's people who believe that this is helping and in the right direction. And I'm just going to give 5 quick examples of work that I see happening around the world, if that's okay. So,
Rob, yes, I think in the next few minutes, if you can give us some examples about how the manifesto is implemented.
That's what I'm doing now.
Fine. Then we go to Enno, and maybe we come back to you with some questions.
That's cool.
I have questions about the principles, the last 2. Huh?
Yeah, I should.
Okay, good.
Quickly bring them to life. So I've mentioned already, a lot of the work around CDR over the last few years has been in Germany. I won't talk about Merck, clearly. I will talk about Valida. So Jakob Versner and the work that he's been doing around digital transformation in Valida, health and beauty products. If we think about purpose, they've kind of got a strong purpose in terms of thinking about things like sustainable supply chains, impacting farming around the world, understanding how they source products. They defined their 15 ethical principles of digital corporate responsibility, the things that were important to them aligned with their purpose. And they defined a process by which every project, every product that across the business is aligned with those principles, a whistleblowing process so that people could flag when they felt that they weren't. And Jakob, when he produced that, bounced those off me to kind of just sense check that, yes, they seem to be the right things. They've implemented a CDR council to consider those. So they've put in place the Digital Ethics Board. So it's a great case study, great work that Jakob and the team have done that's been recognised widely in Germany. Now, second case study I wanted to talk about was ethos. So I mentioned them in terms of the CDR principles, the CDR principles that they produced in 2020. They are a supporter of the manifesto. They worked with an organisation called Ethics Grade, Charles Radcliffe, a UK organisation that does AI benchmarking and CDR benchmarking. And therefore, they've kind of benchmarked a number of the top 48 Swiss businesses to see how consistent they are operating and the behaviours against the CDR framework. So that's interesting for me as an example where an organisation is moving from ESG to CDR benchmarking to consider the long-term sustainability of organisations from an investment point of view. In the UK, so I wear 2 hats generally. So I've got a hat that I'm CDR and the work I do around CDR. I have a hat that is an exec director in Alchemy. So Alchemy is a small management consultancy. We help organisations driving business transformation. We use the framework. We created the self-assessment questionnaire that's on the website, but we help organisations think about how they would prioritise the various elements of the manifesto and use that as a framework, which might then result in helping them around decarbonisation strategies or implementing digital ethics governance or considering cybersecurity as examples. We're not alone as a consultancy that uses it as a framework in that way. I mentioned Norway earlier. So Go For It is a Norwegian IT association. Members like KPMG, Accenture, and Norwegian organisations, and they're adopting the manifesto to help them think about the impact that Norwegian tech firms are having on society and the planet around them. I could also talk about, I've spoken a couple of times in Finland, often associated with cybersecurity and resilience, and using the framework in that context. And then the last one I was going to mention was the UN. So I mentioned the Code's Global Action Plan earlier. That on page 12, I think, talks about CDR definition and talks about the CDR manifesto within that. We've published articles aligning the CDR manifesto principles with the Code's 3 shifts and the action plan that they've put in place. And be aware, if you're not, about the Global Digital Compact that the UN is currently out to consultation on, and the CDR community led by Saskia, has put in a response to the Global Digital Compact, which is really important from my perspective, because I used to talk about the SDGs, and I would be delighted to talk about whatever emerges out of the Global Digital Compact.
So
One last one.
Let me just check, Rob. So the United Nations are working on the Global Digital Compact, which 20 years after might cause in the digital environment what has happened with the Global Compact of 20 years ago in the environment.
Yeah, so hopefully everyone's aware of the 17 SDGs. About 5 years ago, I often talked about the need for an 18th because kind of technology and digital wasn't appropriately reflected when they were originally produced.
Yeah.
And I'm delighted that as of last year, and I think the consultation now ends in March this year for the Global Digital Compact. Yes.
Quindi c'è un nuovo obiettivo delle Nazioni Unite per Sustainable Goals relativo al digitale. Okay, thank you.
So my final example, and it's an example outside of Europe, is we saw an article in the Borneo Post. And in the Borneo Post, the Premier of Borneo, so the head of Borneo government, was committing the Borneo government to adopt CDR in the work that it did across the board. And why did that happen? Because he happened to be in Germany when CDR was being talked about. But it's just a reflection of organizations, governments, businesses on an extending basis outside of Europe as well are beginning to think about how to use it as a framework to guide the work that they do to have a more positive impact. So hopefully that gives you a flavour. There are many other stories, but hopefully it gives you a flavour of the depth around the manifesto, where you can find it, and how it's being used, either in whole or in part, in various countries.
Okay, thank you very much, and congratulations, because it seems that is really picking up as a point of reference, no, for all this. While I invite students and the audience here for any questions they might have for you, I would let Enno to start his presentation. We have not seen slides from you, Rob, but I guess that we will see some slides from Enno.
Yeah, and also I'm still less than 40, so I can still use slides. So that's good.
Very good. Jean, if you can also introduce you and explain how you landed on these topics from your previous experience.
Yes, so I'll do a short introduction, then I'll share some slides. So my title is actually, so my job is I'm Director for Digital Ethics and Bioethics at Merck Group, and I will explain a little bit about what this company is actually doing and what this is all about. And I've been doing this job since 3 years, building up more or less the entire topic of digital ethics and bioethics, actually, and I will also show this in my slides, is longer in the company due to our pharmaceutical research. Ethical questions are nothing new to us, but the digital realm obviously is. So what we, just to give you an idea of what I am, so I'm a scientist by training. I have a PhD in biochemistry and cancer research, and I've worked in various roles in research and development in the pharmaceutical industry, and through a management role then came onto the topic of bioethics, which then getting more importance within the company, and then digital ethics came along through some projects, and I'm going to give you a little bit of an intro on this and what I've been doing together with my team in the last years. And just also give you an idea, so my team, we're in total 5 people, and we report directly into the CEO and the board of directors. So this is really as far from a governance level, because of talking of governance, is really far away from the business, and we are independent in our activities. And I always sell my team as we're sort of like an in-house consulting for ethical questions. So I'm going to share my screen now, and then first it's going to be a little bit of an introduction into what the company is actually doing, so you understand a little bit also where we're coming from. So I hope this works and you can see my slides. Okay, yeah, I see it on the screen behind you. Thank you. Okay, very good. So the talk I summarized here on the responsible use of data and algorithms, how we operationalize ethical standards at Merck. And I mean, this is for me how we what we're talking about today is really a bit with the trust and how the trust is critical for the success of digital and data-driven solutions. We, as a company, I mean, we see this actually also as a critical economic factor that we address the trust piece early on to really have long-term successful digital solutions that we can commercialize. Then I'm going to talk about the ethical principles and how we are using our experience in bioethics to address digital ethics questions early on. And then also how we are operationalizing digital ethics within the company, which is a multinational player. So, I mean, this is very marketing, but this is the standard company side where we say we are actually, so we're a science technology company operating in 3 sectors actually, in pharmaceuticals, in life science. Life science is labs, everything from lab supply to biotechnology tools to upscaling of production of pharmaceuticals or any kind of biologicals, but there's also a lot of animal products. And then we also have a branch called electronics. Electronics, it's actually a major provider of liquid crystals and semiconductor materials. Actually, 99% of the semiconductors in this world, they are our materials. So it gives you a vast span of very different things that we have and very different questions that may come from the business when it comes to ethical challenges. And just to give you an idea, I mean, more than 68,000 people, 66 countries, and then 350 years old. So actually, this makes also my work important. It's a family-owned business. So there's the owner family is still majority holder of the company for 350 years. And that's why they also think more than the next 2 or 5 years, but also the next 30 years. And there's a special emphasis on responsible entrepreneurship and responsible decision-making within the company. And this also allows that a position like mine, which obviously is quite an investment for the company, exists and is actually allowed really to push its work forward, because there's also the family interest in bringing this forward and really thinking in this long-term strategy of how do we give trust, and also that there's a certain responsibility for the products you bring to market. So this is and you can see this also, I mean, in the family, the company is hosted in Darmstadt in Germany, and actually the family is a big sort of like funder of activities in the city and all the culture and all the arts. So they really see this kind of sense of taking care of the of society, and there is a responsibility that comes to a society. And so this also comes to when they bring innovative products to the markets, and products, therefore, there might not even be regulation because they're breakthrough innovations. You have to think already ahead, how can I behave responsibly? And maybe also we'll have to educate society in a certain way, or influence political decision makers that they are aware that these changes are coming.
So if I may ask, how much of your production in terms of pharmaceutical is, let's say, on the border or beyond the borders of what is already regulated? At 2%, at 10%?
I mean, the production of what is regulated?
Yes, I mean, you are developing some products which are at the border of what are beyond what is already regulated. You of course, to sell something, you need approval, no?
Yes, I mean, especially when it comes to pharmaceuticals. But for example, one of the innovations that were in the company is actually we're a leading provider of CRISPR-Cas gene technology tools that can be used for genome editing and changes of the genome, something that was this, new technology that just came to life 2017. 2012 was discovered and was brought to market very quickly, and we were sort of one of the first ones to do so. And obviously, this is like one product, but it's a very few product that are so innovative. There is no regulatory framework around. It's a very small percentage. So just to, this is just to give an idea. So actually, so the sectors are fairly the same size, all of them. So why do we do this, and how did we actually start doing this at Merck? And so we see that digital ethics, or not addressing digital ethics, comes with certain risks. And this is something these slides I also use to convince internal stakeholders in the company. I mean, we have seen that digital ethics is relevant for companies' actions. Even if all the actions might be legally sound, there might still be ethical challenges judged by the public. And there was the big story around Google's Project Nightingales, which is a health insurer records ascension. And Google actually had insight into health records from several million people. And obviously, this was all signed off in the terms and conditions, but even in the US, this was not regarded as something ethical. And then we also look at 23andMe. 23andMe, I mean, some of you may have heard it. You send in saliva swabs, and then you get sort of like ancestry tests where you originate from, or something like this. You're like 20% Hispanic, something like this. And actually, the business idea behind this genetic testing was never offering the services, because there's actually the tests were sold for below market price, but it was always meant to build up a big genomic database and then sell the data. And this has been done. It has been sold to GSK, actually, a big pharmaceutical company. And this obviously was very challenging. And then obviously, I mean, Operation Cambridge Analytica is also something. And obviously, misleading users leads to a loss in user interaction and often can have a significant economic impact. So this is sort of like why we need to address this whole topic early on. So how did Merck start around this? Actually, it came that our business was more and more confronted with questions on digital ethics. And we had some trigger points. In 2019, actually, we had the debate of, let's say, the societal debate or academic debate on AI ethics was going strong. And also we got some questions, and our chief digital officer came to us with some questions where we have some standards, and the EU at that point had postulated their first principles on AI. Then, and that's something even more challenging, we started a partnership with Palantir. And most of you, I assume, know Palantir. Palantir is a, let's say, data company that is working a lot for US Secret Services and has a challenging reputation. However, they are very good in integrating data from various resources into sort of a good database or a good data landscape. And so what we did, what the business model we have is actually around cancer center patient data in the US. Can we sort of integrate patient data from cancer centers so we can have the cancer centers have a 360-degree view on all this data? But we knew that this comes with a big challenge, obviously, because in obviously here we're working with a big data partner which has a strategic expertise and has also some special projects. We knew, okay, we actually need, for this partnership, we need to set ourselves ethical standards, because this is also critical for us.
Good question for you. When in 2018 Merck started this partnership with Palantir, in essence, Palantir had very different standards in managing the data of patients in the United States.
So actually, Palantir, I mean, they partner with us because they have no expertise in the healthcare area. So how this partnership is working, we sort of like have the knowledge of the healthcare, and they have the big data skills. And so they had actually no standards for dealing with patient data. They have quite some they have quite some standards on how to do things, and they have very strong security principles. but not so much on sort of like consent process, something like this. And I will talk a little about this later.
So that raised the concerns.
Yeah.
Merck.
Yeah, okay. Especially sort of like we needed. Okay, I mean, it was clear for us that we need also to protect ourselves, and so protect our reputation, so that within this partnership, everything that happens in this joint venture needs to follow certain ethical standards that we need to establish. And actually, it was part of the joint venture agreement that we, as Merck, with our experience in bioethics, and I'm also going to talk about this in a minute, take care of establishing ethical standards for this business. And then we have, in general, so what was clear to us, especially also when it comes now to the patient data handling, trust is needed by the general public, by customers, by our partners in ethical data handling, and it's really a critical success factor. And this may be different research, maybe patient data, HCPC stands for healthcare professional data, so like clinicians, for example, but it's also customer data, or for any company, HR and employee data, obviously, are always the most sensitive data. And we see this actually as a key differentiator when competing with big tech, because, I mean, we as industry or as European industry company, we cannot out-tech or out-brain the big tech companies, but we actually have quite some reputation and knowledge in ethical handling and ethical data handling, or sort of ethical behavior. And when we talk to sort of like cancer centers in the US and leading physicians, they said, okay, we'd rather work with you, who have sort of set themselves ethical standards, than really going to the big four GAFA to come with to work with them. So they will say, okay, we rather want to work with you, who have a sort of like a track record on ethical decision making. So, and this ties a little bit back, actually. And so how did we actually come to the ethics? So 10 years ago, or now almost 12, Merck established a bioethics advisory panel, which is called the Merck Ethics Advisory Panel for Science and Technology, to address questions that arise from our research and from our business. And at that time, we had 7 leading academics, experts from different fields. You can see here law, medicine, ethics, philosophy, theology, microbiology, that provide bioethical guidance for questions coming from all business sectors. So it's independent guidance, and it's fully published and implemented across Merck, and sort of enables us ethical science technology leadership, especially, I think, as when I mentioned, when it comes to innovation. And I mean, we have a big business in fertility, female fertility, so obviously it's a very sensitive topic, but also when it comes to stem cell research and genome editing, also as mentioned before. And also this team actually includes advisors from all around the world. So let me just see. And so what this panel does is it enables Merck's business to make ethical, defensible decisions. So our sectors, as you can see here, they sort of have, over the last 10 years, have requested guidance from this panel. And then this usually is translated into principles, policies, and business practices. And we have actually become, the last 10 years, a thought leader in applied bioethics. And some of our work has even been published in peer-reviewed journals. So you see, when we come to the digital ethics questions, we already had quite some experience in how do we deal with ethical questions in our business, just because as a company, especially in healthcare, ethical questions, especially around patients, are nothing new to us.
Quick question. When you have established your policy, your principles in terms of ethics, you are operating in different countries, correct?
Yes.
And in different countries, the ethical standards are very different, correct? While my experience is that 30 years ago, the American multinationals brought into Europe standards for environmental protection, which were well advanced compared to the environmental regulation of Europe 30 years ago. And they pushed, indeed, the situation here further. And is that happening also in terms of ethical standards for you in countries which are different from Germany or Europe? I mean, when you are when you have a factory in Africa, for instance, are you using the same standards, and who is checking that is the case?
Yeah, so we use the same standards. So we always say, okay, for us, the highest standards that is there is binding for us. So we also see, and this also comes with sort of the ethical decision making or ethical responsibility as a differentiator as a business. So here we really try to push this forward, and this is not. So there's no compliance department checking this, but when we, for example, enter partnerships or agreements, applying our principles, our code of conduct is part of the negotiation process or the standard contract. Okay. So actually, there are questions on ethical standards in our code of conduct for our suppliers, for example.
Thank you.
And now, I mean, this is already giving you a little bit of an idea. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about data and algorithm ethics at Merck, and this is going to be in 4 steps. So first of all, how we build an expert group, how we came to a framework, analytic tools, and operationalized checks. And actually, this is we did a very thorough and systematic, holistic approach that led to quite fast external recognition. And this is sort of like done by ethics grades rating, like a rating agency that's on ethics, but we also won awards for our CDR models in Germany. I mean, you heard about the CDR building blocks Rob was talking about before. Actually, there is an award given around these building blocks, and so this is we actually won the first prize in this one, and actually also we published some peer-reviewed publications. I'm happy to share them later on to give you an idea, sort of like what our work is. So because as the science technology company, we are very much based on sort of like the academic and scientific discourse, and we see, okay, something that is published in a peer-reviewed journal and has been checked by the peers. This really gives us sort of like a basis to also publicly discuss what we do and also to improve ourselves and get feedback from the external world. So what did we do? So you heard me talk about our bioethics group, our medical ethics group that helped us throughout 12 years. So we said, okay, we can build on this expertise. So they cannot help us with these digital questions around data and algorithm handling. So we said, okay, we just built up a similar group to this, that are renowned industry and academic experts in the digital field. Once again, experts giving us non-binding guidance. And second of all, we built a code of digital ethics, which were digital ethical principles for Merck that sort of like define for us principles to act on. And why do we actually need these principles? So why do we come with this? For example, in bioethics, we don't have this. But in bioethics, there actually are clear principles existing in the fields of medical ethics. They have been existing since the 70s. They have really crystallized as key principles. One of them, for example, autonomy. We all know this when we go to with surgery or we get the education process by the doctors, and the autonomy principle is here playing the field that shows us, okay, you need to be educated to make a full educated decision whether you want to undergo this treatment or not. But in the digital sphere, nothing like this exists yet. So it was up to us to say, actually, first of all, we need to define principles to act upon so that we know that we are behaving ethically. So if we uphold these principles, we are behaving ethically. And this was actually a larger process. And you can see a short overview of the principles here. Non-maleficence, transparency, autonomy, beneficence, and justice. And they're all defined by 3 sub-principles. And as I mentioned, we have a publication on this, so you can go in a lot more detail. But how did we get there? Actually, what we did is we had a look in all the publications and all kind of ethics codes or ideas for principles in Europe from 2015 to 2020. All of them we tried to really survey, okay, what kind of principles are out there, and how can we build a very well structured set of principles out of this that we can then easily operationalize in the business. Because principles are nice, and sort of like you can always say, okay, now we have principles, we put them on the shelf, and whenever somebody comes and asks us, we show them that we actually have some principles. I mean, I'm not kidding, this is often how all these things work in the corporate world. But we really wanted something that we can operationalize. So we developed this very systematic tool, and there's the publication that's out there that's really defining how is this actually we came to this code.
A very important point I want to make here to this audience. In Italy, we have always the feeling that in Germany, they give orders, prescriptive instructions. You see, Enno starts to smile. Because that is part of a bias we have in Italy, thinking that Germans work out of orders and instructions, and they don't discuss and they don't dispute. While the real situation, I noticed, for instance, with environmental regulation, as well as the quality systems in general, they are very smart in using non-prescriptive processes, but performance-based, in essence, instructions, saying you need to be non-malevolent. You need to do something which is good, which is highly questionable, and you can discuss, you can dispute. And Italians, of course, would be lost immediately in discussions because actually they are not really functioning very well with non-prescriptive rules, okay? We prefer in Italy to give rules which are impossible to be complied with, such very, very low speed limits. Nobody respects limits, and we are all happy overall. Overall, the system is wasting a lot of money and energy in doing so. So this is what you're saying about the criteria you have used. You're saying to be efficient and to make that happen in real terms, you need to have non-prescriptive approaches, universal and multi-perspective. Am I correct?
Yes, that's the idea, that we have something Yes. So the idea is, for example, these principles, they are sort of like guiding principles, and but they're sort of like across all, they can be applied to, let's say, many different kind of areas and fields, and you can also have the look at the ethical challenges from many perspectives. This is what the multi-perspective means. Yeah. So, but exactly with these principles, for a certain application, you can actually develop prescriptive rules. This is, you're going to say, okay, for this technology in this area, for this business model, we don't do the following. And then you say A, B, C, D, and this is due to the standards, to the principles we set ourselves. But this is then sort of something we developed on the sort of like based on the principles. We then can really develop prescriptions for certain applications. But we did not want to come up with a framework that just gives prescriptive rules right away. Also, it's very difficult.
Also, I think that you have systems in place in such a way that you can change criteria, but not principles, no?
Yes.
So everything which is assessed, established, and so on can be changed. And that is also my experience in the German systems, quality systems, and so on, which are extremely flexible from this point of view. And people are used to a management in factories and companies, which is cooperative with workers and managers and so on. And that makes the system extremely flexible and efficient. Okay?
Yes. And so, and as I put this out here, actually, so this code, how we call it, we developed is actually, we can use it, and I will show this also in a minute. We actually use it for analysis of ethical challenging cases. And then obviously it's the basis for recommendations by the panel. It's a guide for the employees. And it's also an external statement to create trust, because we said, okay, we need this external trust, sort of like by customers using this. Otherwise, we do not have sustainable business models. So this is what I say here. So there's two overstructured features. So it's an internal self-commitment, and at the same time also an external positive declaration of intent. And here is just a little bit more in more detail. So here you can see we have these 5 principles, and they're all defined by 3 sub-principles. And this obviously, all these terms are very philosophical, and that's why I have a specialist in my team who is an ethicist, and sort of like he can sort of like guide us in certain regards and drive this forward. For the employees, it's most important to understand that these exist, and then sort of like if they have some kind of gut feelings or ideas coming up, that they come to us and we can give them advice. And obviously, you could say, okay, how do you do this now within the company? How do we ensure this? What is this? And how do you put this through it? And there's an overview of different kind of ways how you can anchor things into the company's guidelines. Obviously, there's laws and regulations, everything you must do. Then there's a little bit stronger, but there's like codices and standard operation procedures, certificates in the company, and then we have guidelines and charters. These that employees follow to their best knowledge and belief. Same as our code of conduct, for example. And then even much more to the relaxed side, you more have like an idea exchange of opinions and best practice sharings. And we had to look, where do we best place this within the company? And we discussed this actually with the board of directors, and we decided, okay, we put this as a charter. Charter is actually the highest standard we have within the company, the highest governance document, which means it applies to all employees. All employees need to be trained on it, and everybody needs to follow it to their best knowledge and belief. And this is sort of like in the middle of sort of like keeping our operational freedom, while at the same time being credible enough, keep the competitive advantage, and maintaining the social license to operate. So, and then from the code, as I mentioned, we then sort of like developed a tool that's called the principle at risk analysis. So we have our principles, and actually we can go through a systematic analysis with my team with certain questions to see, okay, are principles affected in a certain way? And here, for example, I have this exemplary problem statement that says, okay, should we care about the way our partners handle patient data? So, for example, our joint venture at Palantir, and then we sell this to a cancer center. And should we care if this cancer center actually has standards in place for handling patient data and how they do it and how they actually consent the patients? And sort of like if we run this question through this analysis, it comes out that if we do not care and we do not think about this, because we might say, okay, it's just a tool, we sell it, and everything sort of like the customer does with it is up to them. If we would handle like this, 5 of our principles would be at risk here. The ones are highlighted. And so what we actually did then with the panel is to discuss, okay, what kind of things do we have to put in place that these principles are not at risk? And parts of this actually is that when we enter a partnership with the cancer center, we sort of like check the minimal standards, and we also give them ways, or we check that they have minimum consent procedures and a certain security systems in place. Otherwise, they cannot become a client. So this is sort of like responsibility, thinking a little bit ahead. And let's say in the previous times, you would have thought, okay, it's up to the client to do this. But since we are offering this kind of technology, we have a certain responsibility as well. So you can see a little bit how this works actually. So we have a dilemma or some ideas within the business. They then come to us with questions to my digital ethics office, where we discuss the questions. And if we see, okay, there's really a root case to this, then we really go through this analysis and we do this principle at risk report. Then we have the discussion with digital advisory panel, which is then giving the recommendations to the business, and then business can then implement these recommendations. And usually then there's follow-ups after one. It's also a classical governance process within the company. And
yeah, in the last 6 months, how many of these situations have you had to deal with?
And so actually, the panel meets quarterly, and each panel session we have 1 or 2 questions. So you can see it's actually quite some upcoming, and they come from a lot of different sectors. So they might be from our healthcare sector with digital health applications, but we also right now, a big topic for us is actually the human resources. They're beginning to use AI applications in HR for identifying talents or for identifying people that should be promoted or put on the talent fast track, something like this. And obviously, this is then very sensitive when we use AI solutions in this kind of environment. And so this is a big working field for me now. And also, next week, actually, we're having a discussion. I mean, this is not with the panel yet, but internal discussion, because ChatGPT, you might think, okay, this is an impressive tool. But actually, there are ways that companies actually can in-source it in a sort of isolated environment and use it for their purposes. It's like the pro model, the licensed model. And the company is thinking of using it. And sort of, obviously, we have to make sure quite some things before this can actually apply for some of our work.
You mentioned HR. I guess that you had digital ethical issues concerning how your people are using devices, apps, and the like. What is the current practice in Germany? People in Merck, they have two different mobile phones, or they have one mobile phone for working and for home?
Unless you're an executive, you will also always have a separate work phone.
So you have two different mobile phones.
Yeah, we have two different mobile phones, and for us, actually, we have quite a strict. And this is not so much my work, but we have quite a strict governance when it comes to which kind of apps. We all have company iPhones, but it's sort of they are very strictly regulated in what kind of apps you can actually put on them.
Well, if you are an executive, you can have only one. But,
yes.
But you should have three.
Yeah. It's like because they have different contracts. Obviously, it comes then together with.
Okay, in my experience, huge problems. The higher you go in the company, the deeper are the problems in terms of handling not in a proper way data and personal data.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead. So that is not part of your scope.
No, that's not.
Okay.
So, and for example, so you see now, okay, I discussed a lot Syntropy, for example, this the collaboration with Palantir, but there's more things happening. So, for example, we started. You can see a little bit. Okay, we built the foundation and we tested it. And we have this governance designed and put in place. And what we do now, and this is when I'm talking about us, actually, we start developing digital ethics checks for our data analytics centers. And at the same time, we also developed code trainings now that everybody is.
You can go on. You can go on.
Okay. Yes, I was just checking. Si è frizzato?
Si è frizzato lui? Sì. Ok, pensavo si fosse interrotto perché...
We don't hear Enno anymore. Rob, are you there?
I'm still here, if you can hear me.
Yeah, we can. It's a hell of a work, huh? They are well ahead. Sometimes I'm lost because digital ethics on one side and bioethics on the other side. I understand there is a different speed and different time of starting this. Yes, here we are back.
Yeah, unfortunately, the internet in Germany or digitization in Germany is not as advanced as we would like it to be. So,
come on.
Even if I'm sitting in Frankfurt on the main knot of optic fibers, my connection sometimes is unstable at home. So that's a real challenge.
Maybe on Friday afternoon that happens.
Well, probably everybody's already on Netflix, and so the peak is up. So I don't know. So I think, let me just continue. So I was just going into our, just share again. So here we go again. So what we did is actually, so we have a big data analytics center sitting on a big data lake, and there's lots of different information. And in this data lake, currently there are more than 700 analytics use cases that are being developed. And so this is really a data lake of multitude of information, maybe like customer data or storage data or any kind of this. And so this is, as I mentioned, this is our life science sector. So this is more tools like biotech tools or analysis of sort of like production data and lab materials. So it's not healthcare or patients. But still, there's a lot of data in this data lake, and upon this data lake, through a software called Foundry, people can run analysis use cases. And the head of this department came to us and said, well, I mean, we have quite some use cases, 700, and I would like to know, do I actually have ethically challenging ones among these use cases? And if so, how could I identify those that actually we need to address? And nobody can sort of, I mean, we cannot bring all 700 cases to the panel, and also at the same time, very few, we believe, are actually have ethical challenges. So what we developed with them in the last year and is now being implemented is the a checkpoint system of digital ethics checks among critical stages in the life cycle of creating such a use case. And you can see here, it's given below. So actually, this is a very strict process which comes from ideation and planning to proof of value installation, and there's checkpoints at this point. And actually, people, when they kick off a use case, they already have to enter quite a bit of information when it comes to sort of like, how do they have the budget for this? Did they have compliance? Do they have data protection? Do they have the support from their managers? So everything of this they can already enter in the sort of like in the software that is operated on the data lake. They already have to enter this. And what we actually did is that we added a few ethics questions as self-assessment to that. And then sort of like this then runs through a sort of like, there's an intake form that's to be filled out by them. This then runs through a black box with sort of like sex or principles. And these are easy lay people questions. So it's easy for them to answer. And this generates a report, which comes out with with sort of like a risk figure. And this is just a number. And this is not automatically triggering anything, but if this risk score is high, actually constantly high, this will actually trigger a discussion with the leaders of the data analytics unit. And if they then see, okay, there's actually something happening, then they bring this to us at the digital ethics office. So this is just how this is working. And so this is actually quite advanced and the most advanced I've seen in the industry so far, how this is actually working. And then this is just to summarize up what I've been telling here. So one of all, I mean, trust is critical for the success of our digital solution business models, and we believe it can be established by proactively addressing digital ethics questions and gray areas, and really lining out our do's and don't do's and how do we behave, and also really demonstrate this transparently what we are doing. And actually that operationally these principles enables digital innovation, sort of like, it does not hinder it, it gives more like guardrails left and right. Often ethics is seen something that is stopping things, but in my years I've been doing this, I've never seen it stop projects, but more give guardrails and a little bit clearer line where to go and in which frame things can be developed. And this really offers us competitive advantage. And putting here, I mean, the citation is a little older, but it's sort of like, it shows that actually corporate measures take to increase ethical performance are associated with positive benefits to shareholders, which in the end then makes our CEO and CFO happy, and which then sort of like really shows also the benefit of having a unit such as mine within the company. And that's it.
Thank you very much. I don't know if you want to think about one or two questions for Enno and Rob Price, or
could I make an observation?
Pardon?
Could I add an observation to
Yes.
John Enno's presentation, just while people think? We did some primary research started last year, and published it in July. And part of that was to look at different market sectors, their adoption of AI and other technologies, and the importance they placed on digital ethics and AI ethics. And it's probably not a surprise to say that those industries that are naturally highly regulated are far more advanced. And I think it's important to recognise that the work that Merck and John Enno talked about there is highly advanced in the market. That is not the norm. That is at the forefront of work that's out there. And then other industries, and I'll pick one, again, not necessarily a surprise, financial services. Absolutely, we're intending to use AI, but less interested in AI ethics or digital ethics as an example. So the rates of adoption are dependent on the nature of the industry, and I suspect the degree of regulation and reputational damage that would result in getting it wrong.
So just saying, Rob, that we should expect from financial industry, because they are less regulated and because they are used to do more what they want, in essence, that in terms of ethics and digital ethics, particularly, there is a lot of room for improvement.
Yes, as an example. There are other market sectors, but as an example.
No, but the intrusion of algorithms on the stock exchange, I mean, it seems that they are still in the very primitive phases of understanding what can be done, what should not be done, what should be forbidden, and so on. And the damages for all holders of stock, for stockholders, might be quite substantial indeed. Thank you, Rob.
Actually, I can say this. Actually, when we look at sort of like which kind of, I mean, if we look around on sort of like what other companies are actually putting this forward, I mean, the pharmaceutical industry actually is the most advanced really in this, because they really they have seen this kind of problems before, and they push this forward. So that, okay, we have ideas how to address this. And actually, I've been sort of like talking to other companies in the last years. I mean, and we actually see that actually in finance, I mean, some companies in finance, they are actually, especially the banks, I mean, others not so much, but the banks, they also see quite some strict regulations nowadays, and they actually think about this, especially when it comes, for example, to credit approval, something like this. But then when we really think about investment companies, M&A directions, there is no standards in place regarding.
Yes, thank you. I have two observations. From my experience, I have the point of view more of the CEO, because that has been my job for many years. And so as a CEO, I would be worried about the fact that I need to multiply policies. And so I was intrigued by your presentation, because you have done a lot of work on ethics for your products, so bioethics, correct? And you have gained a lot of brand on that. Then, when you start describing digital ethics as your boss, your CEO, I would say, John, can you put together the digital ethics with the bioethics as much as possible in such a way that we can gain traction one from the other and gain an advantage, a competitive advantage in terms of brand awareness, no? Because our people buy our products because they trust us as medicines and the like, and they are also ensured that we are dealing with their data and the digital issues in a similar way. I don't know if I explain myself.
Yes.
I see the risk of multiplying structures, policies, processes, and so on in a never-ending.
So yeah, we try to keep this lean, obviously, and it's, as I said, this is more. We act as sort of like we don't have that many policies in place, but it's more sort of like we come as a consultancy. I mean, there's also the other approach. I know there has been a publication from Floridi and Mikanda around ethics-based auditing, where people really look at sort of like every kind of project and they do like ethical auditing of the projects. We really come more as an advice body into it. And actually, this is sort of like based on this is a successful model. I mean, usually when I try to sort of like, when I talk to other leaders in our business or try to sort of like convince them sort of like they should work with us in certain regards, we usually come with success stories. We can tell them how this actually has helped people to really bring their business ideas forward.
Okay. So thank you very much, Rob and Joanna. And not particularly, Rob, you explained us and to the students here in the room that Merck is one of the most advanced experiences across the world. So don't be afraid. Bear that in mind. So congratulations, Jean. At the same time, I have a question for you both. In Italy, we are at the starting point. How would you start as a consultant? What would you suggest to a company? Number one, to start with principle number one of the manifesto: set a board, give power, room to someone to start looking at. I would personally start from suppliers and partners, because what I've seen in terms of piercing the corporate veils is always related to suppliers and partners of companies. It's very, very often the case. And I was not surprised that Merck had problems with the American company, in 2018 first. Anyway, what would you suggest to a medium-sized company that needs to start from scratch in implementing a CDR approach? Rob?
So that's often the question that we start with. I suppose there are two things that if I'm wearing my consulting hat, and the two questions that I get are, I need to consider a holistic way of looking at the impact that we have, or measure the impact that we have. And that tends to be a conversation a bit like earlier, in the sense of these are a set of principles and a framework, and how through interviews, how would you kind of measure yourself in terms of the impact you have in each of these areas, and which of them are more important than others, to try and then find some sort of high-level roadmap of actions. Because it's very unlikely. I mean, the leader was a case in point where they did implement the CDR council and policy and principles. Most organizations will implement something, not all of it. Now, that's the other angle, and the more common angle that I have is from a CXO point of view. Somebody will have an issue around how do they make an improvement around their environmental impact? How do they consider the way in which they protect data or increase the resilience of their organization, better protect their reputation, better enable them to recruit people, Gen Z, into the workforce, better enable them to access investment, which tends to be looking at one or more in combination of those areas.
Okay.
And it tends to be more focused. And I think one of the things, the conversation I had with Saskia once upon a time, was the scope of this and the scope of the impact we're trying to create is massive, and we can't possibly hope to do that everywhere all at once. What's important is that any organization that we engage with, or that any other organization, any other consultancy engages with, we can make them better. So how do we look at where they are and understand how we can improve the positive impact that they are having on society or communities or the planet, or indeed mitigate or minimize some of the negative or consequential harms. So be aware of the framework, awareness, understanding of what organizations are doing, but more often, how do we make it better in one or more of those areas?
Okay, thank you. Next week, on Monday, we will have a lesson which includes bits about the energy impact, the CO2 emissions of websites. And so, as you mentioned, we will look at the website carbon tool. Which helps people understanding what is their impact, how much CO2 is produced when people are visiting their website and the like. And that I've seen and noticed that is a very simple way to start helping people understanding. We should, and maybe you have already, have something similar. We should build together a tool to understand what the impact is of your corporate, of your CDR, of the CDR you are already implementing. I'm starting my work, my consultancy, from always saying you are already following a CDR policy. But the point is that that policy has been given to you by suppliers of software and hardware, and you are just accepting it. And so the question is, what can you accept and what you should not accept, and how to change? But actually, it would be fantastic to have a tool from 1 to 10 or something like that, measuring where you are in your journey toward a responsible CDR actually.
And Pietro, on the website, there is just such a tool. So the self-assessment, 35 questions, it's a subset of a wider set of questions. And that auto-generates a report in response.
Okay, thank you very much. I've not seen that. I will go back on that. Thank you. Jean, Enno, and then we close.
I mean, so just in thinking, okay, what do you, I mean...
You forgot that at some point you were at the starting point as well in Merck, no? But if you think back...
So I mean, so the thing comes for us, this comes with, where this comes from, I mean, as I mentioned before, I mean, it's a little bit special because it's like a family-owned business, so this really comes a little bit through this responsible entrepreneurship has been longer within the company. Or has always sort of been part of the Acne ideas. And so what this topic actually needed is the sort of like the ownership by the leader. It cannot be just say something, okay, this is something that the data scientists need to do or our IT department has to take care of, but this actually needs to be owned at all levels. So you need sort of like the awareness on the CEO level or the owner level, but then also sort of at the middle management and at the data scientists or like the people working on these things. So this is then, and if you have like this kind of awareness and responsibility at all levels, then only then this can come to life, because you cannot delegate this, and you need to create a culture where you can address these kind of questions.
So you mean like for every other change management process, if the example doesn't flow from what is normally called the top of the company, and I'm always instead thinking that it would be better to say that the CEO is supporting others, so it's the bottom of the company. However,
the enabler,
okay, yes, that is true for every policy you need to implement in a corporation. Any question from the audience, ragazzi? Tutto troppo in là. Okay. Thank you very much, Jean, Enno, Rob.
Thank you very much, and congratulations for the very great job and interesting procedures that you have come up with. Really congratulations.
And I commit inviting John Enno to Italy as well as Rob next at the first opportunity.
Looking forward to it. I can do some sun.
But during summertime. Okay. Grazie. Ciao.
Ciao. Bye.
Grazie mille.